So before we start learning today, I want to dedicate today's shiur to two very special people. My dear friend Rabbi Eckstein dedicated this shiur Le'ilui Nishmasai of Rabbi Kellemer from, I think it's West Hempstead. Rav Kellemer, Rabbi Yehuda, was a great teacher of Torah and an unbelievable leader to his community, and a person that gave his kehillah and Klal Yisrael so much compassion and guidance. And to his brother, Rabbi Yechiel ben Reb Shimon Aryeh, who was a pillar of chesed and dedicated his life to help Oni ve'evyoin, and especially Yoshvei Eretz Yisrael. So the Torah we learn today should be Le'ilui Nishmosam, and they should both be Melitza Yosher for their wonderful and beautiful families, and we should only hear Besonis Tovas. So the topic we are discussing today is Zechiras Masei Amalek. This coming Shabbos is Shabbos Zohar. And like most of the Shiurim I've been giving in this past year, with a special emphasis on COVID-19, on the Magefa, which we are still in the midst of. So Zechiras Masei Amalek is a mitzvah d'oraisa. And this Shabbos we read Parshas Zohar. So how closely is the Kriya of Parshas Zohar associated with the mitzvah d'oraisa of Tizkeres Asher Osa Lacha Amalek? How associated is the Kriya with the mitzvah of Zechiras Masei Amalek, which is an asay and lo taseh, so the mitzvah to remember, and the lo taseh, lo tishkach. Shalosh machloikes bedover. In Brochas Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, there's a discussion in the Gemara. Kol haTorah kula b'loshen kodesh ne'amro, o b'kol hashon. And Rashi explains what is the nafka mina regarding Kriyas HaTorah. Would we say Kriyas HaTorah could be in any language, or does it need to be in Lashon Kodesh? And Tosfos asks, but Kriyas HaTorah is not a mitzvah d'oraisa. It's only a mitzvah d'rabbanan. So what would the nafka mina be min HaTorah? And Tosfos says, there are some parshiyos that are d'oraisa, kamo Parsha Zohar. So what we learn from Tosfos is, the mitzvah of Zechiras Masei Amalek is not just tell the story with your own words, your own fashion, the way you choose to convey the message of Masei Amalek. No, you need to read the parsha. And that is why what language you use is dependent, whether Kol haTorah kula b'loshen kodesh ne'amro or b'kol lashon. So what we learn from Tosfos is the mitzvah d'oraisa is to read this specific parsha, but still, doesn't need to be Shabbos Zohar, doesn't need to be from a Sefer Torah, definitely doesn't need to be with a minyan. What we do learn from Tosfos is, it's not just telling the story in your own way, in your own style, but rather reading the parsha. The Rosh goes a step beyond Tosfos. Tosfos Yud Gimel, the Rosh is Daf Mem Zayin, Perek Zayin, Siman Chof, Piskei Rosh. When the Gemara tells the story, Rabbi Eliezer Shichar Ravdoi Kedei Letzar for Leminyan. Rabbi Eliezer had an Eved, he let him go, he freed his Eved to be able to mitzaref him to a minyan. And the Rosh wants to prove from here, even for a mitzvah d'rabbanan, it is justified to free a slave, because it's only a mitzvah d'rabbanan. And the Rosh says it's a doichak to say, it would be far-fetched to assume that this was Shabbos Zohar, and it was to read the Parsha Zohar, which is ba'asoro medioraisa. So the Rosh seems to say, Kriyas HaTorah ba'asora, that is a mitzvah d'oraisa. But it's so difficult to understand why. How do we know that this mitzvah you need to perform with a minyan, and why? So there are two different suggestions in the Achronim, but both are very far-fetched. Doichi Godoil. The Kerenoida says, because the mitzvah of Schir is associated with the mitzvah of Mechia, the two sides of the same coin. And just as the mitzvah of Mechia Amalek rests on the tzibur and not on the individual, the same the mitzvah of Zechir is on the tzibur, and that's why you need a minyan. So why is this so far-fetched? Beyond the question, are these two mitzvahs really two sides of the same coin? And are they so closely associated one with the other? In another 10 to 15 minutes, we will discuss this question. But tzibur has nothing to do with a minyan. The mitzvahs which rest upon the tzibur, minui melech, mechias amalek, binyan beis hamikdash, they rest upon melech Yisrael. And he needs to mobilize the entire people, the entire nation. That is the concept of a mitzvah tzibur. A minyan has nothing to do with tzibur. A minyan has to do with dovish begdusha. It's a different concept. The other approach, Pu'ula Socher, Reber, Talmud Agro, and the Masarav, and he says, because Chazal say, Ein Shmoi Sholem, ve'ein Kisoi Sholem, ad she'yamucha zecher Amalek. So it is only at the end of days, when Amalek will be ultimately destroyed, that Shem Hashem will be Molei, and it will be pronounced like it is written, and therefore this mitzvah is a dovish begdusha that necessitates a Sorah. Once again, yes, Ein Shmoi Sholem ad she'yamucha zecher Amalek, but the concept of dovish begdusha is Kaddish and Kedusha. When we mention explicitly Kedushas Hashem, Nagdishach v'naritzach, Nekadesh es shimcha, Yizgadel v'yizkadesh, that is a dovish begdusha, has nothing to do with Schias Masay Amalek. So my fundamental feeling would be, Loi olo al das arosh, there's really a mitzvah d'oraisa to read the Parsha Basora. Just want to make a fascinating observation. In the Rosh, it is written as mitzvahs asora d'oraisa, tosfot arosh. There's one letter missing, and sometimes one little letter could make such a difference. In the Rosh, mitzvahs asora d'oraisa. In Tosfot Rosh, mitzvahs asay d'oraisa. So if you take the reish out of asora, you're left with asay. It's a mitzvah asay d'oraisa, beyond doubt. Of course, it's a mitzvah asay d'oraisa. I think the Rosh means to say ikroi mena Torah. Twice in Shulchan Aruch the Machaber paskins, Kriyas Parsha Zocher is a d'oraisa. In Erchas Kriyas Torah Kuf Mem Vav Beis, Dalet Pashi is Tov Reish Pei Hei Siv Zayin. Mitzvahs Kriyas Parsha Zocher Ben Torah, and that's why we have to be machmir more than by any other Kriyas Torah. So my feeling is, regarding the Shulchan Aruch and the Rosh, both the Shulchan Aruch and the Rosh, ikroi mena Torah. The Iker mitzvah is d'oraisa, and Tosfos and the Rosh. The Rosh follows in the footsteps of Tosfos. The mitzvah d'oraisa is not just to tell a story, but to read the parsha. And therefore, Kriyas Parsha Zocher in Shiur, Chomor Ma'oid. It is more chomer than any other Kriyas Torah because ikroi mena Torah. But the details are definitely the Rabbanon. Shabbos Zocher, Kriya metoich Sefer Torah, with a minyan, those are definitely midrabanan. The Rambam and the Chinuch have a totally different approach, and according to them, the mitzvah d'oraisa is just to convey a message. Use your own language, your own style. Choose what you want to say, and what is the message you want to convey, and the way you want to convey it. Rambam mitzvah say kuf peites, chinuch tov reish gimel. Rambam once again, pereke alocha hei mehelchas melochim. The Ramban ala Torah Pashas Kiseitze is mesupak. Between Tosfos and the Rambam, he doesn't quote neither Tosfos nor the Rambam, but he is mesupak. The Ramban is in doubt whether the mitzvah is to read this specific parsha or just tell the story of Amalek. So these are the three different approaches. Question number 2. Exactly what do we need to read and why do we need to read it? There's a machlokes Mogen Avraham and Mishnah Brura Tov Reish Pei Hei. So the Mishnah Brura quotes the Shlo dealing with an interesting question. Person lives in a little town, he's the only Jew in town, and where he lives, there is no Sefer Torah nor a Megillah. And Chodesh Adar has started, and he has a huge dilemma. He could travel right, he'll get there for Shabbos, he'll hear the Kriya of Pasha Zocha, but they don't have a Megillah. And he won't make it on time to be elsewhere to hear the Megillah. He could travel left, he'll get there by Purim to hear the Megillah, but he'll miss Shabbos and the Kriya of Pasha Zocha. What should he do? So the Shlo Paskins, he should go right, because Zohar is Torah, Megillah is Midrabanan, and therefore the Kriya of Parsha Zohar overrides Mikra Megillah. Mogen Avraham disagrees, and he says, if he's going to go left, and he's going to get there by Purim, put him in the morning, they read Vayove Amalek. That's Parshas B'Shalach. And one is Yaitzu with that parsha as well. He doesn't necessarily need to read the end of Parshas Ki Teitzei, which we read on Shabbos Zohar. He could also be Yaitzu on the end of Parshas B'Shalach. There are two parshios in the Torah dealing with Amalek. Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Tet Zayin, Tofresh Pehei disagrees. And the argument of the Mishnah Berurah is the mitzvah is to remember that we have a chiyuv to destroy Amalek. And the mitzvah to say, Timche Zecher Amalek is only in Parshas Ki Teitzei. In Parshas B'Shalach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises, Ki mochoi emche Zecher Amalek metachas hashamayim. But our mitzvah to fight Amalek is only in Parshas Ki Teitzei. And that is what we need to read. And therefore the Mishnah Berurah says, the Shiloh is right. Parshas Zohar comes before Mikra Megillah. And I think the argument, the machlokes between Mogan Avraham and the Mishnah Berurah touches upon a more fundamental question. What is it exactly that we need to remember? Is it the mitzvah to destroy Amalek? Or is it just the treachery and the rishos of Amalek? What he did to us, and not what we are supposed to do to him. That is the fundamental question. So the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs clearly says the mitzvah is to remember and not to forget that we have the mitzvah to fight Amalek and destroy him. The Rambam supports the Mishnah Berurah. That is only in Parshas Ki Teitzei that we read Shabbos. The Ramban al Torah writes, we have the mitzvah to tell about the evil and the rishos of Amalek, who was the first one to dare to attack the Jewish people. We were on the way out of Mitzrayim, and he didn't have one drop of Yiras Hashem. And the Ramban says we need to remember this story to understand that there's a good reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will destroy Amalek. It's not for nothing. So according to the Ramban, if the mitzvah is to understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu will destroy Amalek, then maybe Parshas B'Shalach would even be preferable to Parshas Ki Teitzei, because the story of Malchemes Amalek is not related in Ki Teitzei, rather in B'Shalach. So I think the Machlokes Mogan Avraham and Mishnah Berurah would be dependent on the fundamental question, what exactly do we need to remember and why do we need to remember? Is it like the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs? We should remember ultimately when time will come to fight Amalek, and that supports the Mishnah Berurah, or the understanding of the Ramban. We need to appreciate why HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates Amalek. And that is in Parshas B'Shalach as well, maybe primarily in Parshas B'Shalach. And there might be another question, which is also dependent on these two fundamentally different approaches. Are women included in the mitzvah of Zechiras Masei Amalek? That's a machlokes between Chinuch and Minchas Chinuch. Sefer HaChinuch clearly says, and it's a Chiddush, he is the only one of the Rishonim that deals with this question, and it's a surprise to me. The only one. Sefer HaChinuch Tofresh Gimel says, women are exempt, because whoever doesn't have the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek is also excluded from Zechiras Masei Amalek. And women are not supposed to be warriors. They don't wage war. Yavam Samach Beis the Gemara says, Ish darko lichboish ve'ein ishu darko lichboish. And because women are exempt from Mechias Amalek, they're also exempt from Zechiras Masei Amalek. That's the Sefer HaChinuch. The Minchas Chinuch argues, how do we know that these two mitzvahs are two sides of the same coin? Who says? It's a mitzvah to say she'eina zman groma, noshim chayavois. So this is an interesting asymmetrical machlokes between the Chinuch one of the Rishonim and the Minchas Chinuch and Achronim. Chofetz Chaim, Sefer HaMitzvahs Kotzar, HaKotzar Ayin Vav. I don't know if everybody is familiar with the Sefer. The Chofetz Chaim achieved unbelievable fame with the Sefer Mishnah Berurah, which has become one of the classics. in Jewish literature. There's no from home in the world, I think, that doesn't have a Mishnah Brura. And also the Chofetz Chaim Hashmias Aloshon, but the Chofetz Chaim wrote many Sforim. Most of them small Sforim, and the Chofetz Chaim dedicated his life to the benefit of Klal Yisrael. He didn't write Sforim al Shas. All the Sforim are Tzoyrech Hashah. And the Chofetz Chaim strongly felt that besides learning halacha, to know es derech nelech bo es mas asher yasun, it is also extremely important that people familiarize themselves with the mitzvahs say, especially those that are noyeg bisman hazeh. So Sefer Mitzvahs HaKotzer is a compilation of the mitzvahs say, only those that are noyeg bisman hazeh. Mitzvah ayin vov is schiras maseh Amalek, not mechias Amalek, but schiras maseh Amalek. And the Chofetz Chaim writes, anoshim venoshim chayavois. So Chofetz Chaim feels the same as the Minchas Chinuch. Women are included in the midst of schiras maseh Amalek. Does that mean that they need to come to shul to hear the kriya? No, definitely not. If the Chofetz Chaim would hold that women need to hear the kriya of Parsha Zohar, he would write it in Mishnah Brura. And it's not in the Mishnah Brura. And I think this proves that women don't have a chiyuv to hear the kriya. The mitzvahs say the uraisi, yes. But the kriya of Parsha Zohar is a din in kriyas HaTorah, like all the other kriyas. And women are not chayev b'kriyas HaTorah. It is not only that we don't find the halacha in Mishnah Brura. One of the great Rabbanim in London, a few decades ago, was Rav Dinner. He was an Rav Beistin and a very choshev Goen and tzaddik. And in his writings, he testifies that he heard from the daughter of the Chofetz Chaim, Rebbetzin Sachs, that her father did not let the women and girls in the family go to shul to hear the kriya. I don't know whether he was against it, but he definitely didn't send them to shul. So the Chofetz Chaim clearly maintained women are not chayev to hear the kriya of Parsha Zohar. It's a din in kriyas HaTorah. Yes, ikroi min HaTorah. So when we hear the kriya, we're mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa. But it's not a chiyuv anoshim, only an anoshim. And there are different opinions regarding this question. Sharas Shuvas Binyan Sien, the Orach Lanel, was one of the great Gedolim in Germany. Rabbi Yankov Ettlinger, who was the Rav of Altuna. Chelik Beis Simachesi writes, Shomati memori v'Rabbi Reb Avrom Bing, sheya Talmid shel Reb Nosson Adler. And Reb Nosson Adler sent all the women in the family, even the maid, Hamishareses, to shul to hear the kriya of Parsha Zohar. V'kach ani noyag acharov. And when I inquired a bit, I think that in Kirot Ashkenaz in Germany, the minig was that women went to shul to hear Parsha Zohar. But I think that was a minig only in Germany. Nowhere else. So, I quoted the Orach Laner, Reb Nosson Adler. The Chassam Sofer had this minig. It's not in Shuvas Chassam Sofer, so it's not a psak. But on Chelik Gimel Droshes Chassam Sofer, the Chassam Sofer writes that his minig is that women go to shul to hear the parsha, and the Chassam Sofer was the greatest Talmud of Reb Nosson Adler. So obviously, this was Reb Nosson Adler's minig, and the Chassam Sofer following in his footsteps. Who else says that women are chayiv? Chuvas Maharil Diskin, Reb Shilei Diskin, and he was the Godel of Yerushalayim. And on Kuntasach Simon Kuv Beis he writes, Noshim are chayiv to hear Parsha Zohar. And I think it is from him in Yerushalayim, that's the minig, and women flock to shuls on Shabbos Zohar to hear the kriya. Could we define that as minig Yerushalayim? I don't think so. I know that it's Reb Shlomo Zalman did encourage his family, the women, to go to shul, but in Alicha Shloima, it is clear, quoted in his name, that Me'ikar Adin women are not chayiv to hear the kriya. In the Hasidic world, Minchas Aloza, the Munkat Sharov, Chelik Beis Siman Aleph, adamantly argues, women need to go to hear the Kriya of Parshas Zohar. So what do we have? Binyan Sian, Reb Nosson Adler, Reb Shir Leib Diskin, and the Minchas Elazar. On the other hand, Shalosh Teshuvas Toras Chesed Simalamed Zayin, the Toras Chesed, what is one of the greatest Gedolim in Poland, Reb Shneur Zalman from Lublin, and in his elderly years he came to Yerushalayim, and he was definitely Megedoli Yerushalayim, and he writes in his Sefer Toras Chesed, Me'olam lo ra'inu v'lo shamanu, that women go to shul to hear the Kriya of Zohar. So the Toras Chesed was in Yerushalayim the very same time, together with Reb Shir Leib Diskin. And he writes, Ma'olam lo ra'inu v'lo shamanu, I never heard of this. V'mashe kusafta b'shem godel echad, shenoshem chayavois, maybe it's just hearsay, I don't believe it. And even if it's true, he's a Das Yochid. I assume he means Reb Nosson Adler. So yes, it is true, because the Binyan Siyam heard it from his Rebbe, and he was a Talmud of Reb Nosson Adler. But what is important is the psak of the Toras Chesed Noshim are not chayiv, and even more important, me'olam lo ra'inu, me'olam lo shamanu, never. How about Sephardi Kehilas? Kaf HaChaim, nobody is more authoritative than the Kaf HaChaim with Minhogas Svarad. Kaf HaChaim, Tofresh Pei brings Lemudei Hashem, Rabbi Yehuda Najara, who was one of the great Sephardi Gedolim hundreds of years ago, and he says, Noshim are exempt. They do not have a chiyuv to hear Parshas Zohar. So the Toras Chesed, Kaf HaChaim, Lemudei Hashem, Chofetz Chaim, my great Rebbe, Divrei Yatzev, Simareish Peches Shuvas Chaim, says women do not have a chiyuv, and he proves it from the Divrei Chaim. That's a spark of genius. There's a tshuva in Divrei Chaim beginning with Ezras Noshim. What is the level of kedusha that an Ezras Noshim has? The women's section in shul. And the Divrei Chaim says definitely not the same kedusha as the men's section, because there are so many mitzvahs that the men do perform and women do not, like Kriyas HaTorah and Dalet Parshiyos. So the Divrei Chaim writes, Dalet Parshiyos, one of the Dalet Parshiyos is Parshas Zohar. So it is clear from the Divrei Chaim that women are not chayiv in Parshas Zohar. That's the Divrei Yatzev, my great Rebbe, proving from the Divrei Chaim. Toras Chesed, Divrei Yatzev, Chofetz Chaim, Kaf HaChaim, Lemudei Hashem. One of the great Talmidei Chachomim in Lakewood, Rav Forsheimer, he is the Moira Roa in Lakewood, and he quotes in the name of Reb Moshe. He heard from Reb Moshe Feinstein that women are not chayiv in Parshas Zohar. Moran Reb Chaim, one of his amazing Sforim, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, is Tameh Dikra, and at the end of the Sefer, he conveys many psukim that he heard from the Chazon Ish, and he clearly says, according to the Chazon Ish, women do not have to go to shul to hear Parshas Zohar. The Brisker Rav in Yerushalayim said, till I came to Yerushalayim, I never in my life heard that women go to shul to hear Parshas Zohar. So in the Chassidish Welt, we have the Divrei Yatzev, based on the Divrei Chaim, the Litvische world. Who are the four first and foremost greatest Gedolim of the Litvische world in our time, in the past 100 years? Isn't it Chofetz Chaim, Chazon Ish, Brisker Rav, Reb Moshe Feinstein? And we quoted all four of them. Women do not have a chiyuv to hear the Kriya of Parshas Zohar. So to me it's a pele. Shalos Teshuvas Minchas Yitzchok Chelik Tesim and Samaches, he writes that Rav Poskim paskin that women need to hear Parshas Zohar. I don't think so. I don't think any poskim paskin that women need to hear. How do you define poskim? Usually when we talk about poskim, we mean Mogen Avram, Turei Zov, the Shach, naturally the Bes Yosef and the Ramah, the early poskim. No one says women are chayiv in Kriyas Parshas Zohar before the Oruch Lener. And even he quotes a minag of Reb Nosson Adler. We don't have a tshuva of Reb Nosson Adler. Minag, chsam soifer. But very few poskim say that women have a chiyuv. Reb Shir Leib Diskin, Minchas Elazar. There are many more poskim that say women do not have a chiyuv. But my most powerful argument is anybody that doesn't say Noshim are mechuyev is as if he says they're not mechuyev. Because the pashtus is no. It's a kriya. Women never have a chiyuv of kriya satayra. Parshas Zocha, Parshas Achodesh, Parshas Kolam, Parshas Porah, kriya satayra. If any posik feels that Noshim are chayev, he should say so. Those that don't say anything, we assume they're potter. And they don't need to say Noshim are potter, because Noshim never have a chiyuv of kriya satayra. So any great posik that doesn't say chayev is as if he said potter. And therefore, how could the Minchas Yitzchak say, most of the poskim maintain Noshim are chayev? And I say, none of the poskim maintain Noshim are chayev, and all of them say Noshim are potter. Because whoever doesn't say chayev is the equivalent of saying potter. Some later achronim do say chayev. But that's all. So my firm opinion is, and let's be clear about this, Noshim do not have a chiyuv to hear Parshas Zocha. And this minig was unheard of until our days. In Ashkenaz, yes. Yerushalayim, yes. But it's not minig Yerushalayim. It's not binding. The Teres Chesed was in Yerushalayim and he said there is no chiyuv. Reb Shema Zalman didn't feel there's a chiyuv. Why do I say all this? Because I am terrified about this upcoming Shabbos Zocha. Most women's sections in shuls are relatively small, and if many women come, it will be extremely cramped. In my shul, the men's section is big, very high roof, well ventilated. The windows on three sides. The Ezes Noshim is small, very low roof with no ventilation, and that is the case in most shuls. And with this Magefa still raging, it could be a terrible sakana if so many women will come together, cramped in a little room, and that could be a huge booster for the spread of the disease, which is pikuach nefesh. So Baruch Hashem, many have already vaccinated in Israel, and Chutz La'aretz less. So I really feel that this Shabbos Zocha, women should stay at home. I was never makpid. My late wife, Zechroina Lavrocha, and daughters should come to shul. And I prefer they don't come to shul, and for a very simple reason. In my opinion, you're not yoitze the mitzvah diuraisa unless you hear every word. According to Rosh and Tosfos, which is the Psach and Shulchan Aruch, as I explained at the beginning of this year, you cannot be yoitze the mitzvah Schiras Mas Amalek only by reading the parsha. Minat Torah doesn't need to be in shul. You don't need to be from a Sefer Torah. You don't need a minyan, but you need to read the parsha. According to the Mishnah Berurah, Dafka Parshas Kiseitze. According to Magen Avraham, Parshas B'Shalach as well, but the parsha. And if that is the case, if you skipped one word, you are not Yoitze, just like Kriyas Shema. If you say Kriyas Shema, you skip one word, you weren't Yoitze. And the same would apply to Schiras Mas Amalek. And it's almost impossible for women coming en masse to shuls to hear every word. Not always could you hear that well in Ezes Noshim, especially in the back of the Ezes Noshim. It depends on the acoustics of the Beis Medrash. So I always told my wife, Zechron Evrocha, my daughters, don't come to shul, because if you skip one word, and when so many women come to shul, some of them bring their babies and their little children, and so it's almost impossible to hear. Every year, Parshas Zochar, I used to come home and take out some chumoshim, and my wife and my daughters read the parsha, because I think the vast majority of poskim feel there is no need for women to hear the parsha in shul, and there never was such a minhag baroiv kehilas Yisrael. Poland, Galicia, Hungary, Romania, Northern Africa, Southern Europe, Kilat Sfarad, Hasidim, none of them had the minig woman coming to shul to hear Parsha Zohar. So this year I am so afraid, and therefore I recommend women should read the Parsha at home. And if they feel uncomfortable, they should make a Toras Nedorim. They should not go to shul in order to prevent the spread of this terrible disease. So COVID-19 brings shilas that we never dealt with before, and I hope we will never need to deal with again. Minchas Osha on Corona. I spoke so much about the Sefer. It's in print and might be in stores even before Shabbos, or I hope right after Shabbos. I doubt it'll make it to America so fast. But so many times I said, this is the one Sefer I hope by the time it comes out, it would not be Nogea Aloha Lamaisa at all. Let's hope. So we're dealing with questions we never thought about before. And this Erev Shabbos, I got frantic phone calls from Melbourne, Australia. The government decided on a total lockdown from Friday night, 12 o'clock, midnight. So the Rabbonim and Askonim and Gaborim called me saying, Shabbos in the morning, the shuls will be closed. We can't have Kriyas HaTorah. What should we do? And I gave a very novel psak, which you will never hear after and probably never heard before. And I told them, take 3 Sifrei Torah out of the Oren Kodesh Friday night after the davening and have a proper Kriya. Parshas HaShavua, Rosh Chodesh, and Shkolim. And you may even say the Brochas. How could that be? Did you ever hear of such a minhag? No. And I hope you never will again. But that was my psak, based on Tshuvas Maharasham. Chelek Aleph Kuf Nun Ches. The Masham deals a question, Poyalim, workers that need to leave early in the morning. And by Alois Shachar, they cannot be in shul. Could we make Kriyas HaTorah before Alois Shachar, before the Alois? In the Masham Paskins, yes. And he says Kriyas HaTorah is not necessarily biyom velo balayla. You need to read on Shabbos. So the proper minig is between Shachris and Musaf. But that's not ma'akev. Kriyas HaTorah is noeg balaylo kiviyoim. And in Shabbos Kodesh there is no kpeda not to learn Mikro by night. We know al Piari, you don't read Mikro by night. It is based on Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer Perek Menvov. Moshe was 40 days in the heavens. How did he know when is Yom, when is Lailo? Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, also quoted in Tanchum and in other Midrashim. When a Kodesh Baruch Hu teach the Mikro, Torah Shebechsav, it was day. Torah Shebechsav is Balaylo. And there he said we don't learn Mikro by night. But Shabbos is an exception. Shalos HaTshuvas Yosef Oimis Nun Dalet Nogi de Mitzvah, who was a Talmud of Reb Chaim Vital. But the important thing is, the Marsham says, Kriyas HaTorah is Noyeg Balaylo Me'ikar Adin. Does anybody else deal with this question? Pnei Maven, who was one of the Hungarian Gedolim, a contemporary of the Marsham. He deals with this very same question. And he is more skeptical. And the Pnei Maven says, maybe Kriyas HaTorah is dafka biyom velo balayla. Why? Because there are 2 reasons we find in the Rishonim. Why is Kriyas HaTorah definitely, and why is it dafka sheni v'chamishi? And not revi'i l'moshel. 2 reasons. One is days, sheni v'chamishi are yomei rachamim. The other reason is these 2 days Botedin convene and many people come to have the services of the Beis Din, and that is why these 2 days are days of Kriyas HaTorah. These both reasonings, the rationale is only b'yoyim v'loy b'laylo. Beis Din doesn't sit b'laylo. And only yoyim is a zman of rachamim. Laylo is always a remiz of midas adin. But nevertheless, even the Pnei Maven says it would not be a brocha levatola. And based on these 2 great poskim, I paskin for Melbourne, have the entire kriya with shiva kriyim by night. Maybe it's not kedai to make a brocha because sofek brochas lakol, and after all it's a gevaldig chiddush. But even a brocha, I would say you could rely on the Marsham and the Pnei Maven. They deal with Lefnei Alois Shachar. They don't deal Lefnei Chatzos Lailo. But by halachic criteria, there's no difference. Lailo is Lailo. And before Lois Shachar is Lailo Lakol Dovo. So that was my psak. And it's a chiddush of a psak. We never dealt with this question before, and I hope we never will deal with it again. But that is unique of this period. And I wrote so many tshuvas, which, as I said, never were relevant in the past, and we very much hope they will not be relevant in the future. So we are Baruch Hashem in Yemei Ador, Umeshenechn Sodamar ben Besimcha, and so many wonderful people turn to me. How could we be Mekayim the Mitzvah of Simcha in such a tragic time, in such difficult times, when so many families lost their loved ones, family members, and so many people are ill, and everybody is so afraid? And I say, it's a challenge, but that is Jewish life. It is only our Torah that dictates to people not only how they need to act, what must you do and what you should not do. The Torah dictates what we should think, what we should believe, and how we should feel. And the Torah dictates not only our thoughts, our emotions as well. And that is what a gewaldige chiddush. So most of the mitzvahs aseh and lo ta'aseh dictate our actions and our deeds. But we also have the mitzvah of emunah and Yud Gimel Ikrim and our emotions, ahavas Hashem v'yiras Hashem. And it is not only loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but loving every fellow Jew. V'yohavtu l'royacha kamoicha. The Torah dictates when we should be happy and when should we be sad, which is a chiddush, because people would say, it's just a state of mind. When there are happy events, you're happy. And when tragedy strikes, you're sad. How could the Torah say when to be happy and when to be sad? Yes, a Jew is expected to control not only what he does and what he doesn't do, what he abstains from doing, also what he thinks and also what he feels. V'somachto b'chagecha. Yes, we are supposed to define and control our feelings and emotions as well. In Minchas Shel Torah, I made such an amazing comment. I ask a very simple question. Did Avraham Avinu love Yishmael or hate Yishmael? He both loved him and hated him. How could that be? Well, it's Rashi, Parshas Lech Lecho and Parshas Vayera. In Parshas Lech Lecho, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham to sacrifice his son. And the Pasuk says, Kach no es bincho, es yechitcho, asher ohavto es yitzchok. And Rashi brings Chasal, Kach no es bincho. Avraham says, I have two sons. Which one? Es yechitcho, the only one. And Avraham says, Ze yoched le'imoy, v'ze yoched le'imoy. He is one to one of my two wives, to his mother, and he is one to his mother. Asher ohavto. And Avraham responds, Shnehem ahuvim alai. I love them both. So which one? Till HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately says, Eis Yitzchak. We skip one parsha, Parshas Vayera, when Sarah kicks Hagar out of the house, and Avraham gives Lechem v'chamas mayim. Why didn't he give more than that? Rashi writes, Lefi shesana, he hated Yishmael, lefi sheyotzo letar b'sara. Did he love Yishmael or he hated him? Seems to be a contradiction. Two Rashis, so close one to another. We must assume in Avraham Avinu's huge heart there was room for ahava and sinah. At the very same time, he loved Yishmael as a father, and a father loves his children regardless of what they do and what they're up to. Avraham loved Yishmael as a father, but he hated an aspect of Yishmael, and the fact sheyotzo letar b'sara. That was Avraham Avinu. And sometimes in Jewish life, we are expected to have control over our emotions. And there are so many stories of Gedolei Yisrael in days of mourning when they were totally heartbroken and mourning over spouses or children that passed away. And Ken Yom Tov, Poshet Tzura V'Lovash Tzura. He became like another person. The Neshama Yesed arrived and everything was changed. Till Moitzoi Shabbos or Motzi Yom Tov V'Avdol, and then he broke down again. So yes. So Hasidim say in the name of the great Rishon Tzaddik Rabbi Yisrael Meruzhin, a Jew always needs to be b'simcha. It's just a question of volume. More, less, but always b'simcha. And we have so many reasons to be happy, even in the most difficult of times. I related the story 1,000 times, the story that I heard so many times from my late father, my great father. He was together with a Kloiser Megerebi, 1945 Pesach. Be'emek HaBocha, in hell, under the Nazis. And they ate matzahs miraculously. The Kloiser Megerebi worried weeks before Pesach, what's going to be with matzahs? And a miracle. The Allied bombers destroyed a German train, which was broken open, and a huge quantity of grain was spread out in the fields. And those Nebuchadnezzar Jews on the way home from work every day used to bring a few little kernels into the camp. And a day or two before Pesach, they crushed those kernels of grain with rocks. And unbelievable, b'mesirus nefesh. They had matzahs for Pesach, and the Kloiser Megerebi recited the entire Agoda by heart with a little group of people. I knew some of them. And they sang songs of Pesach, and they rejoiced. And we wonder, their situation was more tragic than Golas Mitzrayim. But it's Pesach, and they told the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, filling their hearts with emunah that Kodesh Baruch Hu will help. So that is Jewish life. We're happy when we need to be happy, and we're sad when we need to be sad, and there's room in our hearts for everything. And when we think about it, in our days, we've been through 1,000,000 more difficult times with all the tragedy and sadness. We all have so much reason to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so much to be grateful for. That in these difficult days, the vast majority of us are doing well. We're well, our families are well. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us, even in times of despair, even more in times of sorrow. When the Romans came into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, B'Shas HaChorban, they saw the Kruvim hugging each other, and they were taken aback. Is this what the Jews have in Kodesh HaKodeshim? Yes. So those Kruvim were a reflection of our relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara says in Bava Basra, B'zman she'oisen etzon she'mokim pneihem mishel ochiv. B'zman she'ein oisen etzon she'mokim pneihem al habayis. B'Shas HaChorban, miraculously, they not only looked at each other, they moved from the corners of the Aron, and they embraced each other. And that came to convey a very important message. Never does a father feel the love of his children as when his children suffer. Shelo neida, we should never know. When a child is ill, when a child has cancer. And the love his parents feel is overwhelming. And the same with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we suffer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu suffers with us. When we cry, He cries with us. And if it's shaykh to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us more, that is a human trait. But in a way, in as far as we could appreciate and understand, yes, in days of sorrow, He loves us even more. And we love Him even more. And we have so much reason to thank, and so much reason to sing, and rejoice in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Mishanechnas Oda Marben Besimcha, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us simcha, and this pandemic should go away. We're starting to see in Israel positive signs, and the vast vaccination program is kicking in, and things start to get better, and I hope this will continue, and Bekorev, Kodesh Baruch Hu should take this away. We should bezeichen the nissen v'neflois v'simchas olam al roisham b'meiru v'yomeinu amen.